It feels like this week could really change the fortunes of your season. Maybe that's a true statement, not only for this week, but for the next couple of weeks as well. So many changes, so many trades, so much could be, should be, and needs to be addressed on this week's strategy session. We've got to talk about the players you've got to consider moving on, the upgrades, the downgrade options, and of course, we're a month out from the mid-season bye bunch of rounds. It is a lot to talk about on this week's SuperCoach and AFL and Dream Team strategy session. Joining me having this conversation, and I'm super excited to get his thoughts on all that and more. It's MiniMonk. Hello, how are you? Big week of trades and decisions for coaches to make, isn't it?
It is. I feel like we say it every week, but it's kind of because it's true. You've only got, 2 trades or 3 trades that you can use across the formats in any given week. You've got 30 to 31 players in your team. You've got half a dozen players you probably want to trade in, half a dozen players or maybe more players in your team that you want to get rid of. So many different millions of combinations to have, and we're here to try and help you dissect it down to the few that might be the best for your team.
I feel like there's 2 players we should probably lead the conversation of the podcast off today, but maybe the first of the 2 to talk about is a Tom de Koning. Depending how emotive your response of rage trades are, you either telegraphed the trade out after that really underwhelming Carlton performance on the weekend. Tom was not on his own in being put to shame with what we know they can be versus what they showed they were against the Crows. But he's in an interesting spot for us, Minnie. So I'm keen on your take here. I feel like there's kind of 3 junction points here. One is we picked Tom in our starting squads as almost a bit of a tweener pick. We wanted to get a guy that would give us an opportunity to see who are the best premium rucks. Neither you or I felt like a set and forget strategy was the right approach. And certainly if you rolled with Cherry to start the year, unfortunately that's been validated. So we picked Tom to give ourselves that first glance, have a look and see, and then as a result, mid-season, correct course and make the trade. So that's one thing he gave us. The second thing he's provided for us is really great scoring at a value price point. And then now he's sitting in this spot for us where we feel pretty confident to know who the top end rucks are based off form. We've got a trend line of fixture analysis to be able to go who's got good matchups and who doesn't have good matchups. And then there is this concern that he's looking a little bit sore and that Pitternet may come in to balance that up a little bit. Whether or not Carlton run a 3-pronged forward line of tools, I'm not too sure. But these are the gathering narratives that are happening around Tom. And then alongside it, you've got a Gawn who is in a rare vein of form this last month. The last 3 weeks, Tristan Cherry has bounced back. Rowan Marshall, while there's some concerns about a toe injury, is undeniable value. And Tim English is winding back the clock to a handful of years. And so where do you sit on Tom de Koning? Because the decision to trade him out has these cascading variable impacts that come to our upgrade cadence in other moves and actually impact our buy structure as well. So where did you sit at the start of the round is maybe a better place to start the conversation as we got out of round 8, as opposed to now sort of 48, 72 hours past that. Where do you sit and what's been the process?
The very knee-jerk reaction to it is there are 3 rucks. I'm going to include Tim English in this because he went 140 odd AFL fantasy and 160 Supercoach on the weekend as well. There are 3 rucks who have outscored by what I perceive to be a top 2 ruck move for the year that are within reaching distance this week that might not be within reaching distance next week. Maybe it's time to abort. And it's obviously very logical to do that. You get spooked. It was an 80 Supercoach. It was a 60 odd AFL fantasy score. It's not a good score to have in your R2 spot. But sometimes we lose sight of what's actually best for our team in the long run compared to the knee-jerk reaction in the short run. And over the last couple of days since we've come out of lockout rather, and coming into looking at it, I've tempered my mood on having to move a Tom de Koning. I think in Supercoach it's a lot easier to justify the hold his only sub 100 score was this week. It was against Adelaide, which is a tough matchup. Carlton were poor. They need to fix a lot of things. But I can see him returning very quickly back to that 105, 110, 115 averaging ruck. And I don't think that there's a massive rush to jump onto someone like a Max Gawn or a Tristan Cherry. And it's for different reasons. For someone like a Gawn, it's 120K to go up to him now. Gawn's going to be over 700K next week. And sometimes you just have to admit that you've let them go. You know, you don't see people trading out. You won't see people trading out an Andrew Brayshaw this week to go and get a Nick Dacos or a Bontempelli or a Butters. Like, it's not what you do. It just feels like you have to because it's the two ruck positions. But in the reality, it's not the end of the world. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, it's a bit harder to stomach because he's had a rougher run of fixtures over the last month, and he's had a rougher run of scores. You know, it's gone 82 against the Pies, 75 against West Coast, 62 against North Melbourne, then 117 against the Cats, and then a 65 against Adelaide. Now, the 82 against the Pies is probably the one that comes actually out of the box the most. I think the other three you can give a bit of a context to. That West Coast game was stinking hot. There were like people at the ground saying it was over 30 degrees. Players were sweating. Players were cramping. I think he had a really, really poor first half and saved his score, especially in Supercoach in that second half. 62 against North Melbourne. Cherry is a beast of a ruck. Everyone's been doing 60s against him, and it's just very hard to score against him. And 65 against Adelaide. Again, a very restrictive ruck. Now, this isn't making excuses. This isn't to say that Tom de Koning is someone I view as being a top two ruck, because I think it's pretty clear now that we can say if you're picking two rucks to be the top two rucks at the moment, it's Gawn and Cherry, and I think that that's pretty indisputable. And I think that you could almost chuck Tim English into third in that mix because he's had a really good run over the last month. But what it is about is this the best time to trade out of a Tom de Koning? And to me, the answer is probably not. St Kilda this week, Sydney next week, GWS the week after. Then it's the round 12 bye, which for some people is a bit scary because they're like, I've got Cherry, I've got Tom de Koning, I've got two rucks missing on the bye. I get it. But if you look straight after his bye, it's Essendon, West Coast, North Melbourne, Port Adelaide. 3 out of those 4 are the 3 easiest ruck matchups at the moment on defense versus position metrics, both in Supercoach and in AFL Fantasy. Essendon with Goldstein, West Coast with either Flynn or Williams, and Port Adelaide with Sweet are just all the gravy you could want. And the last big thing is you have probably missed the time to really trade him out to maximize his cash. Yes, Gawn and Cherry have gone up in cash, but Tom de Koning's also come down. If you were on it 2 weeks ago, you probably hit the right timing, maybe 3 as well. But now Tom de Koning's down back at 900K, which is about where he started in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. And he's down at 560 in Supercoach, which I think is just a little bit more than what he started at. So you're still not maximizing it. You're wasting a trade in tempo in AFL Fantasy and a trade that you've got limited numbers of in Supercoach and Dream Team. And there are some other rucks that have a really nice 10 to 12 week end of the season run that I think we should be looking to target at value rather than playing up for the top price players.
I'm curious on that because we talked about last week, both of us with Rids on the podcast about creative cash generation. Now, since that, Hugh Boxall has emerged for us. A Bo Allen we've at least now seen at an AFL level. We feel confident that Buslingo, whilst probably got good job security in getting an opportunity to be picked, he's not got vest security, which we may have thought that he had through there, let alone some others. A Smiley's not too far away from Richmond. But we did talk about last week on the podcast around creative cash generation and looking at players where we could go, well, if we do this to that, we might be able to make 50 to 100K in a singular trade, but that player's value can grow and get us into that. So was a player like the Rowan Marshall, for sake of a name, who's got 110 potential over the last 2 years, certainly hasn't played to that level. I thought he looked okay on the weekend. There are some murmurings that he's playing a little bit sore with a sore toe, but he's certainly playing for a lot at the moment. You talk about a Tom de Koning. he's every chance of joining that club if you believe the contract rumours of what's being offered for him. And so Rowan's probably playing for a contract in another club. You could argue that he's pumping and pushing through. So I guess I'm curious. You talk about it being a potential, you didn't use the phrase wasted trade, but for a bit of hyperbole, I'll use it. And misquote you and let people go you. That's fine. It's a nice change. But like, could you do a TDK into a Marshall, maximize some cash generation, both with team value and the money you make off that, and then correct course to almost get into him at that prime buy spot? Because using some last 5 games DVP data, it's not an awesome run for TDK, but it is after the buy. And so what's your thoughts about that type of trade as opposed to, no, I'm going to do one down to get a Boxall, I'm going to get into a Fonte, and I'm just going to go one up of Pryor, Davidson, whomever to the premium I like. What's your take? Because I think that's what coaches are wrestling with this week. Where's your landing on that?
It really does start to lose a bit of tempo if you're saying, I'm going to trade out of Tom de Koning for, 4 weeks, missing rounds 9, 10, 11 and his bye, and then be in a position where I'm comfortable enough to trade a Marshall back to him once his run opens back up. It's 2 trades in SuperCoach and Dream Team that, coaches are probably starting to get down into the mid to low 20s. Some might even be in the teens in terms of the number of trades left. And in AFL Fantasy, it's 2 trades when you're trying to probably scrape every dollar off of every play that you can get now to start to get towards a completed team. It just doesn't feel like it's a right use of tempo. Now, it would be a different story if you were saying, I'm trading Tom de Koning because I don't think he's a top 2 or top 3 ruckman, and I'm going to run Marshall because I think from now for the rest of the season, he will be. Fantastic. But I would really have the lingering doubt in my head is Marshall really a top 3 ruckman for the rest of the season? Because right now I see it as you've got the top tier of Cherry and Gawn, and then I think you've got the next tier down, which I think is just English by himself. And then I would put Marshall, Tom de Koning, and Nankervis probably in that next tier. And if you're just shuffling the deck chairs around and people in that tier for when there's a good run, eventually you're going to be wasting what other moves you could be making for players in order to, say, get rookies off your field or get your mid prices up to the out and out premiums when they're at their lowest price and you can really maximize their value.
The other player that we alluded to at the top of the podcast that are interesting dilemma points for coaches, and Tom is certainly a big one because, as you mentioned, it changes the variables of what you could look at this year and what you could look at for trades, not only this week, but over the next month. The other is a Caleb Daniel. I reckon up until about a month ago, not too many coaches had put Caleb in the trade catapult for anywhere at all. It was very much a consideration of, man, I've got a 90s forward that's just going to give us the odd ton and he's going to be a knockout pick and I'm just going to ride him all the way through the year. And if he drifts to my F7, M9, happy days. But over the last month, a little bit has changed in this Kangaroos outfit. And the primary change, Harry Sheezel has moved into that distribution space. And not only have we seen an impact to the market share of ball that has landed the way of Caleb Daniel, you've been talking about us behind the scenes with us, and then Freako's tweeted about it in the last couple of days around just the handball receives for Daniel in contrast to where Harry Sheezel is drastically different. And so you've got the Tom de Koning dilemma to at least ponder through before you even then start to look at, I've got Pryor, I've got Davidson, I've got Moraes, I've got Lindsay, I suppose, to a lesser extent, but still sitting in that conversation of fattened rooks that are ready to roll. You've also got a Caleb Daniel. One more thought before I let you answer that reflection is, we know success comes in fantasy football when you are a week ahead of the trend. For example, if you're a SuperCoach player and you got onto Chad Warner last week, you're a week ahead of the trend because his run, but from now to the bye, is so good for you. You took a little risk on the Bedford tag and the few variables went your way and it's good. And so we know getting ahead of the pack, Mini, and I know you've had a couple of top 100 finishes in SuperCoach and Fantasy as well, it has been super critical to that. So my question is, Daniel screams now we should be looking to move him on with Sheezel in the back line. But the buys are only a month away. We've got rooks we want to get off field, and we don't want to be behind the pack with our trades, but we don't want to jump too early. Marich and Ashcroft owners know exactly how that feels if they've made the trade in the last 2 to 3 weeks. So thoughts around Caleb Daniel and how critical a trade priority is for coaches, not only this week, but in the next couple of weeks before the bye.
I am concerned. I'm not going to be the type of coach that's going to throw the baby out with the bathwater type of concerned. But what concerned me the most on the weekend is how little ball they were trying to give to him and how much ball they were trying to give to Sheezel. So far, I think it's in the last the 2025 season so far, the top 3 players for North Melbourne by handball receives are Harry Sheezel, Tom Powell, and Caleb Daniel. Now, 2 of those 3 really shouldn't come as a surprise. Tom Powell, it kind of doesn't because he's been playing as that more of an outside midfielder, and it's the one that they want to give the ball to for him to be able to launch it in forwards. Now, if you go match by match for those handball receives for Harry Sheezel, goes 7, 13, 18, 14, 18, 15, 19. Very consistent. One outlier game with the 7 in round 2, but very, very high numbers. But if you look at Caleb Daniel for the handball receives, round 1, 9, round 2, 14, 9, 8, 15, 12, 11, 6. We've seen the talk of Harry Sheezel moving into that back line really start to re-emerge in the second half of their round 7 game and all of their round 8 game on the weekend against Essendon. And it seems reasonable to me that that is a pretty clear correlation that he is the one who's losing out. The other player that's interesting to look at for the handball receives in that back line is O'Reilly Hardiman, because he's the other player that did start to move in towards that half back flank. I'm just trying to get it up here. He has had 6 and 6. So when your premier distributor of the ball is getting 3 times as many as the next 2 players off that half back flank in terms of handball receives, and just by the way, also double or mostly fair bit more than Tom Powell as well, who's playing in a completely different role, but is another player that could start to get a lot of that ball. That signifies a role shift to me. That signifies a game shift. The fact it's being backed up with coaches' comments and the fact that it's being backed up by tracked watchers saying that Harry Sheezel is training with the defenders again, to me screams that someone has to lose out if he's going to gain, and the obvious loser out of that is Caleb Daniel, and the obvious winner from that is obviously Harry Sheezel going back to his 115 to 120 ways across the formats. The question is, can you hold Caleb Daniel up until his bye? It's round 12. It's 3 weeks away. Yes, you could. But if you're not trading him at his bye, when are you trading him? Because I think we've seen enough now to know that he probably isn't a top 6 forward. And we have enough other players that we like that are top 6 forwards that don't share that round 12 bye with him. They have the round 14, round 15, round 16 buys. Got someone like a Matthias Filippo who's coming out, probably going to play this week, if not next week, who's a potential option as well to trade into potentially off his bye. I think it's a really good opportunity to trade out of him. I think that it's one that you should really explore. And I think that if you can facilitate a Caleb Daniel through a bit of DPP to a Harry Sheezel type move, that feels a really, really nice move to make this week.
I'm curious, how do we differentiate between the 2 decisions that we need to make now? Because you're right, everything about that break even says now is the time too. Everything about what's happening with Sheezel coming into the side and Hardiman, because I think it's a combination of both of those players being there that is impacting what he is and can do for us. How do you make that priority decision? Again, I know the answer is it's team dependent, but let's help people figure that out where they're looking at, do I get rid of Daniel or do I address a Lindsay on field? Because I feel like the defenders were a little bit more confident yet again to at least this week run upwards of 2. Any more than 2 to me feels like the risk profile's going through the roof. We've played this movie before. It did not go well for people that did it a month ago. I'm a little hesitant to advocate for that again. So how do you differentiate between the two of, no, Daniel's my priority this week, he's got to go, in converse that, no, it's the Lindsay that's got to go. It's the Davidson that's got to go. It's the whomever rook on field that's probably not a defender. How do you help coaches, and what would you use as the differential markers to make that decision?
I mean, Lindsay has a break-even of 47 in AFL fantasy. He's got a break-even of 14 in SuperCoach and a break-even of, I think, about 15 in DT this week. In DT and SuperCoach, you really don't want to trade him. You want to eke out that little bit of cash that you can, just get that little bit more that you can out of him. But in AFL fantasy, it's viable to trade him. You know, he's 539k. You get, 250k taking him down to someone like a Boxall, or if you want to go all the way to someone like a Lewis Hayes, who we were expecting to debut for Essendon with the Jordan Ridley injury. That's 300k that you're making there. It's useful. But the other thing is, have you got a loophole? Have you got a way to have a look at a Xavier Lindsay's score on the first game on Saturday? And if he pops a 60, you can take it. If he pops a 40, you might lose 5k, but you decide that you can put a different rookie on instead. Can you loop between a Boxall and him, with Boxall playing on the Friday night? Can you get creative with some DPP? Do you have a defender mid in your midfield? And if you say he goes great, fantastic, I'll move a Sinclair or I'll move a Sheezel into the back line and take a Zach Reid or a Train or even a Bias off field as a result of it. Whereas in our forward lines, we're pretty chock-a-block. Like, I think most teams are pretty happy with 6 forwards that they're running, But across the likes of Bailey Smith, Rankin, JHF, McRae, Daniel, Petrarca, Marich, Ashcroft, Warner. I think
Martin,
most teams have got
so many.
Martin as well. Like, there's out of those 10 or so names, chances are you've got 5 or 6 of them. I don't think most coaches are wanting to be fielding the forward rookies that they have, be it Caden Cleary, be it Connor Stoney if he's back, be it Espargo for those who went there in SuperCoach and DT. So, if you've got the extra one in your midfield, you can trade Caleb Daniel out, you swing them forwards, and all of a sudden it's opened up. You've got access to, you can go to a Dunkley, you can go to a Neil, you can go to a Sheezel, you can go to a Dacos if that's where you want to go as well. It allows you a lot more options. So when you're talking about priorities between Daniel and Lindsay, it's never about the one player to the other and saying which one do I want out of my team more. It's about what can you do with the trade combination. If it's a world where you can trade Lindsay and Daniel and they're your 2 worst, and you can say, right, I'll take Lindsay down to a Boxall and I'll take Caleb Daniel, put 200k on his head and take him up to a Dacos, or take him up to a Tim Taranto, or take him up to a Nazar Wanganeen-Millera. It's fantastic. And with Caleb Daniel having the round 12 bye, I think if you can get off of him, it's great. Xavier Lindsay's got the round 15 bye, I'm pretty sure, off the top of my head. He's got some okay fixtures between them, but we know he's prone to a floor score. But, if he's your M8 through the buys and you suddenly pop a 90 out of him, that's covering one of your best 18 scores. It's not a bad spot to be in. So there's a lot of information. There's a lot of decisions. I'm not going to point you in one direction or the other and say that one player is more of the trade out than the other. But these are the sorts of factors that I'm considering, that I think I would implore coaches to consider when they're deciding which players are the priority trade outs for my team.
I think, and I love that you're doing that, because again, so often when you're listening to a podcast or watching a podcast like ours or anyone else that you choose to listen to, and that's awesome that you might listen to multiple, the temptation as you're listening to it or watching it is, just tell me what I should do. And that's actually the greatest disservice we could do for you, is go, oh, you should do this. Because not only are you not owning your own decisions, when that goes wrong, I'm fairly confident enough and happy enough for you to send whatever frustration you like. It's social media to me, but it's just more revealing of your character and the fact you're not in control of your team. But it actually doesn't help you grow as a fantasy coach to know, all right, how do I play this game? What are the unique, not only the 30 player variables that I've got, but then the intricate decisions I've got to make in between that. Who's my vice captain? Who's my captain? Which of the rookies am I putting on field? Is it Reid and Trainer and Bice, or am I just running Bice this week? Am I going to find a way to choose to upgrade around, as you've mentioned? No, I am going to get Lindsay off my field up, and it means I'm going to put a Sheezel or a Dacos or a Sinclair type into my mids because I want to put that defender. These are the type of things that, as you're hearing Mini talk about through there, is actually the things we're trying to hopefully help you with, is how to make those informed decisions for yourself, how to give you the thought process, how to challenge yourself when you're being emotive, when you're being overly reactive, or when you're being too slow to move. That's what we try to do here at the Coaches Pond. It's not just go, hey, do this, problem solve, but rather, here's the narrative, here's the nuance, here's the process. Now with the variables you have and the risk profile of how you like to play your game, continue on with that. Hey, give me buys. Maybe we should move over to that conversation because we're a month away from them. I did a really long conversation with DT Lemon the other day on his Patreon. And seriously, that guy, I think he's had like, in the last 4 or 5 years, like been top 500 every year. So he knows how to play the AFL fantasy game. He's definitely a myth that luck is the only factor in success. That is for sure. But spent a long time talking
well
to
this
him.
year as well.
Yeah, I think he's top 100 at the moment, isn't he, the punk? So, save some hats for a few of us, hey? You know, let those that haven't got one. Those that have only got one or two have a couple more. But we spent a lot of time talking about the buys. Where do you see the pain point coming? I'm of the belief that round 12 is the hardest buy to navigate because you've got the combination of the blue dots out and the red dots that you haven't addressed in your bench hygiene all combining together, and teams that haven't even yet had a buy as your trade-in option. So I think that collides into a beautiful potential chaos moment if you don't deal with it over the next month. But what should we be doing over this next month before we get to the buys? How does that impact our trade cadence? How does that impact the trades and the players we look to trade into our side as well as out of our side? Because it's only a month away from best 18. And if we're not careful, all the good work we've done in the last month could be very quickly undone.
Well, I'm not going to try and steal from all the other podcasters that are teachers, be it primary school or high school. But the right thing to do is do your homework.
Oh, no.
Do your homework. Have a look at where your team lies. Have a look at where you've got players on each of the individual buys, be it around 12, 13, 14, 15, or 16 this particular year. And have a look at the upgrade targets that you want to get off of those particular buys. So, you know, as we go into round 13, you're going to have players from Carlton, from North Melbourne, from Port Adelaide that you want to trade into. You know, what are the targets? And from the Dogs as well. Like, who are the players that you want to trade into off of that particular buy? You know, do you say, I really like Sam Walsh, I really want to trade into him in round 13? Or is it Zach Butters? Or is it Tristan Cherry, who you might not own? Or is it Harry Sheezel, who you might say it's finally time? Or is it an LDU? Do the homework, have an idea of who they are, have an idea of who you want to be trading out of your buys, because we've had 8 weeks of scores. Have you decided that Adam Chera is a keeper for the rest of the season, or is a player that you want to run through the buys, or do you want to flip him at round 12? Have you decided similarly with someone like a Jaden Short or a Matt Roberts? Which rookies do you want to look at keeping through the buys because of their potential to be reasonable scorers and their ability to be in their team's best 22s? Players like the likes of Zach Reed and Luke Traynor seem to fit that bill pretty reasonably, as does Levi Ashcroft, who, funnily enough, has the round 16 buy. I think he's a player that coaches who haven't traded out to him now should seriously consider potentially holding all the way up until that buy and then flipping then. And then have a look at how many red dot players you can actually reasonably get out of, and that are ones that you want to get out of and get the cash off of. You know, players like Caden Cleary, he's still going up in cash, but in 2 weeks' time, he's going to beat his max. He's probably not a player you want to hold through his buy. He's one that can go a bit early. Player like a Connor Stone, who's a rolling red dot at the moment, he's very useful as a forward defender because of that. But is there a time where you say, I want to get the 200K off of him in AFL Fantasy with 130K off of him in SuperCoach? Have a bit of a play around. You can start to forecast the downgrades and upgrades, the players that you want to get into and the players that you want to trade out of over the next 5 weeks, and do a bit of a roadmap. You know, it doesn't have to be in detail. If you don't want it to be, you can go in absolutely as much depth as you want, but that allows you to say, at round 12, I'm trading roughly out of this player, and this player, and I'm getting in these couple of players. I'm going to have 16 premium or mid-price players and a couple of rookies. Round 13, I'm doing similarly. And it gives you a bit of a roadmap to be able to figure out how best to play the buys.
Last thing I want to ask you on this podcast before we wrap up, because I did want to ask you about how we timed the trade outs, but you've beautifully nailed that for us in a 60-second summation. And so rather than asking you to run that through for a 5-minute conversation, I'd just say, if you missed what he said about how to build your team's cadence of who to trade in and out, go back 90 seconds to 3 minutes, and Mini's done the hard work for you about not only what the homework is, how to map the homework out, and politely, it's over an 8-week block. It's hard to forecast trade outs, but you can at least go, no, I'd love to do Ashcroft there. I'd love to do Roberts there. I'd love to do Short there. I'd love to do Bice there. That's what you've got, is the 8 weeks. And then you can run alongside it your ideal 8-week trades of, I'd love to do that if I could. I'd love to do that if I could. I'd love to do it. You've done all the hard work for us, MiniMonk. You are the tutor for our fantasy coach community on this one. You've just done the work for us. That's what a tutor does, all right? They did the work for you. Yeah.
They
never had
point
one.
you to the work that you should be doing.
Yeah, I never had one. My ATAR would back that up. You got some more thoughts on that before we talk about upgrades?
Yeah, I was just going to back up on what you said. It's a plan, but plans don't always go to the exact path that you want them to. You have to be flexible. A week ago, coaches were looking to trade out of Levi Ashcroft. All of a sudden now he's a player that I'm recommending that you hold until he's buy. You're going to have a little bit of flexibility. A player's price might not always go exactly the way that you expect it to. People were thinking that Chad Warner would be the cheap pickup this week. Pops a massive score in Supercoach. He's a little bit more expensive. If you hadn't built in a little bit of a buffer, you wouldn't have been able to afford it, but you can pivot from there. And so it's just about having an idea. Don't say, I'm getting this particular player. Give yourself a short list of players off of each of those buys that you're wanting to trade into and that you think can be top 8 or top 6 or top 2 players in their respective lines from now until the rest of the season as your upgrade targets.
It's good advice. We've kind of, when we're looking for the upgrades that we're trying to make, certainly over the next couple of weeks, let alone through the buys, it's a bit more, to a degree, easier to target players off the buy once teams are done. We're like, okay, those 4 teams, those 2 teams, those 4 teams. We feel a little bit more natively driven towards who to trade into. But the upgrades that we're looking at now, it feels like we can be led by one of almost 3 different markers. The fourth one is personal favorites, but I would probably not be looking to do that at this time of the year of players you like to own. I think that's a nice way once you're set for the year, you know where you're going to land, that's fine. But probably you're going to be led by one of the 3. One is a player's break even. They hit that spot where you go, right, this is the basement value time, or at least you hope it's the value basement time, and I'm going to correct course and jump onto them accordingly. The other thing that could be a leading indicator for our upgrade decisions is we want someone that has got an unbelievable fixture at the moment. So we go, okay, no, this is the right time now to get this guy that, even if it's not on the cheaper side, this is their gravy 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks stretch based off the data that is now been at least validated over a 5 to 8 week stretch. Yep, this is the trend. I'm happy to go and get that, and I want to maximize into this player predominantly as a captain or vice captaincy option, or at least the hope that they could be. And then the third driving indicator that's probably running through coaches' minds is their buy structure, where they're looking at going, okay, I feel a little heavy weighted at 12. I want to back weight my team a little bit more. And so I'm going to start to, this premium mid is at a good spot right now to go and get. He's in form. He's knocking the lights out. Butters, Bontempelli type right now. But I don't need to trade into a round 12 buy. I'm actually going to go after a round 16 mid and maximize. So I, instead of Dunkley or a Green, become a little bit more indicative of what's the driver. So there's fixture, there's break even, and there's buy structure. How do you navigate that? Do you have, obviously when all 3 converge, it's go, go, go. But how do you make that differentiator? What are the leading indicators and the markers you would help a coach navigate through? Because there's always more variables than that, but they're probably the overarching 3 that are the tiebreakers for people. How do you make that decision between break-even, fixture and buy structure for who to upgrade into heading into the buys?
It depends on two things. And I'm going to split this into two categories.
Sure.
One is players that you're riding for a few weeks because they've got the break-even, they've got the fixture, and they've got the price tag, and you can see them as being a buy flip. These are the types of players that can potentially make 200k in AFL Fantasy and 150k in SuperCoach. That's when you want to look at them. So players like, if we get another player that's like a Ned Long, where they have a good buy, they have a good fixture, the roller's there, the break-even's there, you don't necessarily see them being as top 8 midfielder. That's the ones that are kind of like the smash picks. You pick them up, you ride them for a few weeks. When you start to get towards your premium players, it's a combination of all of them, as you so rightly have put. The first one that I'm starting to look at this time of year is actually the buys. And the reason being is because we only have a limited number of trades between now and when we are completely into that buy period and we are shuffling deck chairs around to try and get the best team for those particular 5 weeks. If you don't have a round 16 midfielder, which there are going to be quite a lot of teams that don't have a round 16 midfielder, and when I say round 16 I'm talking a premium type round 16 midfielder. If you don't have a Dunkley, if you don't have a Zach Merritt, if you don't have a Tom Green, probably those are the big 3, or a Neil. If you don't have one of those 4, those are 4 that I'd be really considering trading into this particular week, because it allows you to have a player that's playing in your midfield for 4 out of the 5 buy rounds for the next 3 weeks as well, and that potentially could have a good fixture and a good price and a good break even. So the next one that I'm probably looking at is the price, and the reason being is if they've got a good buy round and they've got a good price, but they've got a bad break even, I might save 30k on them. I might save 50k on them. But it doesn't matter because I've got them, and I've got them now until the point that I want to trade out of them, or until the rest of the season. You know, we saw people try to get creative with it with a Chad Warner. I know that Kane asked me a question on the Saturday morning. I think he's like, look, I've got the cash to be able to get Chad Warner this week and give myself the ability to boost next week. Should I grab him? And I went, if he goes a 90, he holds price. If he pops a big score, he's going up in price. I'd grab him now. And he did. And it was the right decision to make. But if you try and get too creative and too fancy with just waiting that 1 extra week from the break even, we've seen how many times it goes against you. We've seen how many times a player ends up going up in price when you expected them just to drop that little bit more so they were in the right range for you the next week. And so that's why I think break even is the last one of those 3. The caveat to that is, obviously, if the break even's 180 in SuperCoach or 150 in AFL Fantasy, it's very rare. We're not going to see a Lockie Whitfield 180 break even after returning back from an injury where he's, you know, pulling a 180 out when he's got a 150 break even type stuff. You don't see that rarely. It's, you know, it's 1 out of every 500 games sort of thing. But if the break even is abnormally high, that's when it starts to factor in. You know, you want to watch players coming down in price. You know, someone like a Max Holmes has had 2 poor games in a row. That break even's 140 in SuperCoach and 120 in AFL Fantasy. I don't see his ceiling as being much more than that. So I say, if I want to trade into him this week, I can. But if I want to wait the week, his price isn't really going to change that much. So that's the way I'd break it down. It's what's the buy round that I need for that particular line? What's the price of the player that I'm looking to trade into compared to other players that are potentially top 8 midfielders or top 6 forwards? And then what's the break even of that particular player is the last one.
And it probably then just the final decider, because that really solidifies you down to probably only 50-50 choices or a 1 in 3 option. And probably more so in the midfield, more than anywhere else. In the forwards, it's quite a narrow field. I'd still say our defender premiums, while a bit broader than our forward premiums, are still quite narrow. I think we know who we want. The midfield feels pretty wide open. And so you mentioned these round 16 premiums. You're going, okay, well, it's Green, it's Merritt, it's Dunkley. And Neil for SuperCoach probably is 1A to the 1B of Dunkley. Well, this week's matchups might just be the defining factor in that decision. So you might be like, well, Brisbane have North Melbourne this week. Okay, that's not bad for Dunkley. Oh, but Merritt does have Sydney. James Jordan hasn't been doing chaotic a work though this year. And that is, he has been as previous years. And then of course you've got GWS who've got Geelong this week, and you're like, oh, for an inside mid, that's probably of the three, the more favourable of the outcome, at least in AFL fantasy, certainly. So it's when it does get down to that filtering and sifting of, okay, I need this, I need this, I need this. All right, now I've got three. What's the 1 week hit that I could extract this week? What's the guy that over the next couple of weeks I like as a VC option? Is that the level of granular detail you start to get to for those last little kind of 50-50 splits?
It really does. And it's because you can narrow it down. Like, let's continue that example. You know, we talked about those round 16 midfielders. In AFL fantasy, there's probably 3, maybe 4 that you're looking to go to. And so then just by saying, I need a midfielder, I need him to be a round 16 midfielder, you've already narrowed the field down to 3 or 4 that you can look to. And then you start to pick them apart and you start to say, right, this team's got these good matchups the next 3 weeks. Then he comes to a couple of poorer ones, and he's got a couple of good ones, and then he's got his buy. He's at this price. He's at this break even. I rate it like an 8 out of 10. This player's got this fixture. I rate it a 7 out of 10. This player's got these fixtures. I give him a 9.5 out of 10. And then you just go for it. You know, sometimes it can be that you just need that player that's 20k cheaper because you just don't have enough cash to be able to scrape off of the player that you want. And you don't want to trade blind into a 230k player or a basement player in SuperCoach and Deep Team who isn't on the bubble. Like, all these small little factors need to be considered when you're just picking apart these couple of players. But if you can start to apply a filter and really narrow down that field that you need to do the heavy lifting on and the heavy investigations into, then it just makes your life so much easier.
Yeah, man. Some really good advice. I think coaches watching and listening to this have been really helped through the decisions they've got to make, because over this next month, if there's issues that need correcting, this is the chance to do it. Because through the buys, I feel like right now we're getting a close to true reflection of where our teams are, but teams are still maybe prioritizing on-field scoring and adjusting there and not developing decent bench depth of playing, of cash generation, of bench hygiene, and are going to get through the buys and want to get into that at least one genuine upgrade per week, or at least the equivalent of that over the 5-week stretch, and they just won't have the cash available to them. And so if your buy structure's a little bit out of balance, if you're not sure the upgrades you should be doing, who you should be moving off, Mini's mapped out a really nice plot and a course for you over the next 8 weeks to go, right, to get my team right for the final 8 weeks after the buys, what have I got to do? Who needs to go? When would I ideally like them to go? Where am I going to need to maximize the cash opportunities that are available to us? And for some coaches, it might mean this week, I'm not saying it's for everyone, this week might be a pure cash grab for some coaches. And in using AFL Fantasy as the illustration, you might not own Boxall, and you might not own Fonte, and you might be like, I've got to get rid of Pryor too, and I'm going to get into Hayes. So it's like, okay, I've got to get 2 of these guys. I've got to maximize my cash because I'm just hemorrhaging opportunities to take it. And with so few sub 300k guys moving, I've got to adjust. So that's where the nuance of the year pops in. That's where what your team is delivering and what you need to do to ultimately set you up for success is really, really critical. Hey, mate, always a pleasure talking fantasy footy with you. I know lots of people get plenty out of it when they hear you speak and navigate some stuff. Always a pleasure, mate. Where can we get in touch with you across social media, by the way? You're pretty busy on X, I see.
Yeah, just mainly on X at MiniMonk10. If you shoot me a message, I'll try to reply back to it. Sometimes people at me in a conversation or in a long form post. I'll sometimes respond back to those as well, but I'll try to get to as many as I can. But yeah, mainly on X.
Yeah, all the details for where you can get in touch with Mini and the rest of us here at the Coaches Panel are in the details of the description. Inside that is also the links to get in touch with us as a Patreon. You can join that group, get hidden access to a bunch of different things. One of the things that you get across all tiers is it's the only place we do a Q&A during the season. And so it'll take a lot of time. We talk you right through the process, the ideology, and still give you an answer of what we would do as well. There's a bunch of different stuff that is checking out through there. If you're just discovering discovered the Coaches Panel and you haven't subscribed to us over on YouTube, there's a video dropping every Monday, every Tuesday, every Wednesday for you to go and check out. There's the trade targets and this episode, the strategy session, and of course the audio podcast. Make sure you subscribe. Give us a 5-star rating. These are just small, simple things that you can do that make a huge impact for us. Hey, friend, good luck this week. Some critical decisions you got to make. Hopefully, we've been able to help you navigate those. If you want to get in touch further, details in the description of this episode, where you can get in touch with our Patreon as well, sits in there. Good luck heading into this round. I hope you win Rookie Roulette, you nail your VC early, and you've got that red dot option to be able to capitalize on it. Until we talk to you again real soon, good luck heading into another big week of fantasy footy.